I was reading recently that a large number of Americans, something like 70 or 80%, call themselves Christians. But alarmingly, of this number, only 20 or 30% actually go to church. And this led me to posing the question, do you have to go to church to be a Christian? I came to the conclusion that yes, you do in actual fact have to go to church to call yourself a Christian. We only have to look at politics. If I called myself a Labor supporting person and at every election or the majority of elections I voted for the Liberal Nationals, I couldn't actually in fact call myself a Labor supporting person at all, could I? Doesn't make sense. So to be a Christian, I have to go to church. And over a period of time, if I don't go to church, I can no longer really call myself a Christian anymore. You can understand why so many Americans call themselves Christians yet do not go to church. Maybe they don't feel welcome at their particular church. Maybe they think a lot of Christians are hypocrites and that all they do is go to church, and outside of going to church, they're not much like Christ at all. Maybe people don't feel welcome at church. Maybe people have had bad encounters with other people at church and so no longer go to church because they think it's a waste of time. Regardless of how people feel, the fact remains that the church is Christ's community, Christ's body, Christ's domain, Christ's spiritual centre. Regardless of how people feel, this fact remains. The church is like a well of living water where people who are thirsty are to quench their thirst. Unfortunately, during the church's history, there have been many occasions when this water did not quite quench one's thirst at all. We only have to think of the Spanish Inquisition and other like-minded things. Gandhi had a famous quote, "I like your Jesus Christ, but I don't think much of you Christians." And we can understand Gandhi's sentiment towards Christians. We only have to think of the British Empire and the mark that the British Empire left on India. We only have to think of the British Empire and how the British Empire swept the seven seas in pursuit of colonial expansion, and how the monarch of the day is, in actual fact, the head of the Church of England. Very much a Christian indeed. Very much a Christian indeed. So we can understand the sentiment of Gandhi, loving, liking Jesus Christ, but not thinking much of Christians. And we can understand the sentiment of many Americans who call themselves Christians and they don't go to church. Yet the fact remains, to truly call yourself a Christian, we must go to church. Because when we go to church, we change the church. When we go to church, we, the church, we, the people, change the church. And the church becomes us, and we, the people, become the church. We need to go to church so that the church will be what the church is to be for all people. This well of living water, this sustenance, this life. St. Francis of Assisi, one of my favourite saints, felt the call to build the church. He felt that our Lord was calling him to physically build the church. But our Lord wasn't calling him to physically build the church. But our Lord was calling him to set the church on fire with vibrancy, with life, to make the church like Christ, because it is Christ that attracts like no other. It is Christ that sets our hearts on fire.